We got new clocks too. They actually work and they're on time. They're atomic.
So 15 seconds.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the monthly meeting of the West Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency. I'd like to begin by leading you in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The first item on our agenda today is the approval of the agenda. So are there any changes or additions, or I'll accept a motion to approve as presented?
I make a motion we accept the agenda.
I'll second that.
It's been first and seconded. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Public comment on matters not on the agenda. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to comment on any issues? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 3, approval of the November 16th, 2017 meeting minutes.
I'll move approval.
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Report out on closed session. Counsel?
The board did meet in closed session to confer with legal counsel regarding existing litigation, which is identified on the closed session agenda, and the board did extend settlement authority to counsel.
Thank you. Review of monthly and year-to-date revenue and expenses. Mr. Zola.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. This report summarizes revenues and expenses for October 2017. The agency had a starting position in Fund 870 and 871 of approximately $12.6 million. During the month of October, we received the third real estate reimbursement, which is really good news, for $1.5 million. And we booked the zero land value and SBE assessments for the flood assessment for 2017 for a total of about $2 million booked into the account. Total for the funds then brought is $14.6 million. On the expense side, most of the activity was in the Southport project related to construction management, and some of the outstanding land acquisitions. We still have a couple more that are litigating, so we'll see a couple more large land acquisition line items coming this next year. The expenditures for the month were approximately $6.6 million, which brought the combined balance for funds 870, 871 to $8 million. We have approximately $20.9 million in the state advance fund account, and that brings our total overall resource position to $28.9 million for the month. This month, we also included the high-level cash flow. It's the fourth item on the monthly cash flow report. And we'll start bringing this report to the board with the budget update quarterly. And I'd like to point out just a couple things about it. It's a sources and uses format, and the top window takes the year's starting fiscal position or estimated fiscal position going forward, and then looks at anticipated revenues and anticipated expenditures for the period. The second two tables break down the sources and uses by what's going on. This model, it covers the entire WSLIB. It's all the activities that we're doing. And it's, even though this one's highly summarized, there's a lot of horsepower and a lot of other data behind it that feeds into it. So there's a lot of information and data that is formatted and processed before you get to this point. The timeline we're using right now is the timeline established by SB5. We know there's some considerations with that timeline as to, in regards to how the Corps can do the federal project, perform the federal project, and other considerations. And let me see what else I want to talk about in this. The resources we have on hand right now, working at the local level, look adequate to get the Southport project done. As we start to look into the federal project with PED and maybe advancing some of the federal components locally in advance of the federal project, we start to see some red come up on the horizon. The overall timeline for the WISLIP using the SB5 timeline, the ability of the Corps to throughput projects, the design and the construction of the projects, and the federal funding available to fund the projects will all start to inform how we size a potential assessment going forward. All this stuff right now is really high altitude. A lot of it's WAGs. We don't know what the ground looks like yet. As we do, those inputs will feed in the model, and as we bring updates back to the board, we'll start to see better and better information. A lot of the details that will show up in the model and the thinking behind it and the conditions and opportunities associated with those things will be presented by Greg in the progress update report. So that ends the monthly report for October. I'll take any questions if there are any questions on that, or Greg can help too.
Are there any questions? You said Greg will be elaborating a little more on
Yes.
some of these items next? Okay. We'll wait till then. This document is going to be very fluid, I would imagine, as time goes on. But we appreciate just seeing the snapshot of, potentially what our needs are through 2025.
It's literally something that changes by the day if you
Yeah.
go back down into the granular details behind it. So yeah, it's ongoing and the assumptions are changing all the time.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next item is our consent agenda, which has one item listed. And is there any comments or questions on that? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I make a motion, we approve the consent agenda.
And I'll second that.
It's been first and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. 7, Southport project update. Mr. Ken.
Good morning, President Ramos, members of the board. I'm here to give you a final update on the Southport project. Things are... That better? Yeah, things are winding down for construction for the year and looking to start back up next spring. But I'd like to go ahead and kind of run you through where we're at right now and where we're hoping to be beginning of next year. So, over the last 30 days or so, we've completed some additional work, demolition work, primarily underground facilities, well abandonments, septic tanks. We got a few more we're taking care of and addressing and coordinating with both the city and Yolo County to make sure those are being closed out. The Borrow 1 ramp construction and restoration's been completed. We've done some punch list items and addressed those. We've got a gate to install down there, but for the most part, that's all be completed. I'll show you some pictures later on in the slides. Roadway construction for the 2017 season's complete. An access road in the north end, South River Road reconstruction were the primary ones on that, as well as the ramp going into Borrow 1. We've completed setback levee embankment fill for the setback levee at the south end all the way up to Station 215, which is just north of Bees Lake. And we do have a short 700-foot segment at the very north end. For the year, we've completed about 14,500 lineal foot of slurry wall and just over 15,000 foot of levee foundation, anywhere from elevation 24 to 26, has been completed so far. We did complete the setback slurry wall, the last 2,000-foot section from north of Bees Lake to that Station 215 I mentioned. And we've also closed out some of the borrow sites. We've harvested everything we're going to do for the year, so a lot of stabilization, erosion control, those kind of measures have either already been installed or will be installed this week. So for upcoming work, there's not much. As we go through the winter, we'll go ahead and monitor the site, the borrow sites, as well as the construction site for erosion, sweepy, sediment control, make sure we don't have any issues or failures on any of those. Contractor does have a small crew they're leaving behind, so we can address those and any other issues during this off-season. We've got some site cleanup and vegetation removal. We'll do the first week of January, and that'll continue on however it needs to. There are some culverts that'll be installed along Village Parkway that we have an opportunity to do this winter, but we'll see how the weather allows us to do that. I believe there's 3 or 4 different locations, and that's primarily for RD access along those ditches. So that may be done the first week of January. If rains and weather don't allow us to do that, we'll get it sometime between now and March. Also, just to kind of give you an overview of kind of where we're at, we've completed 30% of the bid items, so we spent 30% of the construction items on there. We've expended 45% of the working days, so that's where we're at. We'll be closer to 50%, of course, when we start next season. And like I mentioned, 14,500 foot of slurry wall and just over 15,000 of the levee foundation. I've got some pictures for you on some of the different things we've accomplished this year. This is the River Park borrow areas. A4 was our largest borrow area, and as you can see around the perimeter, we've got some sediment and erosion control measures in there. And just in the bottom right-hand corner, you've got the A3. We've got some type 2 clay, which is the central core material for the levee that's currently in there. So we'll be using that next year for installation of the core, and still have some equipment running in there, but like I said, that'll cease this week. The River Park 2 area is one we got into later in the season to get some of the dryer material out and kind of finish our levee foundation. That's just on the south side of Davis Road, west of Village Parkway. You see that in the area over there. We do have a portion of the site just to the west that is a possible location for material to start next year, but that's a contingency at this point. We're currently putting together the 2018 construction plan with the contractor, so we'll share those with the RD as well as the state and feds as we move forward to make sure what we plan to accomplish next year is feasible and in conjunction with everybody else's input. This was the last bit of slurry wall installation behind the Bees Lake area. We finished that 2,000-foot segment a few weeks ago. This is the Borrow 1 restoration area, the drainage pond you see in the top picture, and our newly constructed Y ramp down on the bottom. And this is kind of an overall picture of what Borrow 1 looks like at this point. Like I said, with the installation of the gate, it'll be complete. This shows a few of our roadway improvements, primarily the South River Road one. You'll see that in the bottom left-hand corner. Some realignment, slight realignment we did there, tie into the South Cross levee. In that segment, and then kind of an aerial view just over the top of it. So you can kind of see some of the work we've done. And that's what I've got. Any questions?
I have one. If you go back to the start, the first photo you showed.
Let's see if I can go back. Am I going back for me, Jen? Oh, there we go. This one right here?
No, yeah, that's it right there.
All right.
What's the little red lines for?
The little red lines are the breach areas. So that's where the existing levee is going to be degraded down to about elevation 710, and it'll be open to allow Sacramento River flows into the offset area we're going to be grading. So there's 2 on the south end, right at the Oak Hall Bend area, at the south tie-in limits for the setback levee, and the north tie-in at the setback levee is the 3rd one. Those breaches anywhere from 650 foot to 800 foot wide. It'll have a bunch of rock slope protection, things of that nature to kind of armor it.
Thank you.
Ken, so you're saying they have completed most all of the slurry wall?
In the setback portions, yes, we still have the fix-in-place sections.
Fix-in-place, okay.
That need to be done, so there's a fair amount that needs to be done there. The DMM method, which is the deep wall method, still needs to be done primarily in segment G, a little bit in the south part of F. But the setback wall, slurry wall construction, we've got about, I'd say it's from 215 to 230, a little over a mile left.
Okay. And so with the progress they were able to make this fall with the, favorable weather and whatnot, what's the prospects for, substantial completion in this next year?
2018 is still the goal, end of 2018 for construction. Now, we're going through that plan to make sure we check what their resources are, what their assumptions are. That's still being fleshed out at this point. Depending on what kind of resources they throw, they could finish at the end of 2018, but there is also the possibility going into 2019. We won't know that until we get a little bit further into the details, but AECOM and the team is committed to getting it done by the end of 2018, but I'll probably be able to get a better schedule probably sometime in March, after we've contacted all the agencies, gotten their kind of comments, incorporated them in, and figure out what kind of resources are available out of the hall for actual operators, laborers, things of that nature. The equipment rentals, making sure we have the available equipment to actually do it, and then seeing what the weather's like, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
If we wind up getting a late spring, winter, and we wind up getting rains, it just pushes us back that much further. If
Right.
we wind up getting dry and we're able to get in there beginning of April, we've got a good chance.
Okay, I think that'd be favorable for everyone involved if they're able to, so good luck.
Yeah, I'm
Good
hoping
luck.
so. All right.
So, okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Move on to item 8, which is the WASAFCA updates.
Morning, Chairman Ramos and board members. Just to follow up on the finance portion that Mark had gone into, we just received notice from DWR. They're processing another real estate reimbursement to the tune of about $3.5 million. So we should see that deposited in our account right after the first of the year. Paul continues to do a fantastic job of processing all of our real estate reimbursement requests. Also on cultural resource management for the project, we're currently have submitted our historic property treatment plan for the Phase 2 area, the 3000 South River Road site. That's currently with the Corps for review. We're hoping to get that out for consultation with the SHPO and tribes before the holiday. Keep your fingers crossed on that one. But what we're looking at and what we're proposing with that treatment plan is to avoid the site altogether, other than removing the house foundation and clearing and grubbing of current vegetation. We should be able to avoid the site, which is buried some meters or a meter and a half below the surface anyway, so we should be able to avoid damaging that site. But again, we won't know whether that's approved until it goes through the consultation process. And in order to accommodate that, we did work with the design engineer, HDR, to do a design modification in the offset area. We have different areas in the current design of different elevations, and so we've sort of reconfigured the elevations in order to be able to avoid this site. If all things work out, it'll be a real success and allow us to continue on without interruption to the project. So that's a really good thing. Now, federal project. So I think, as the board knows, we have currently undergoing a cost update. It's been reported, I think, last month. That cost update is still with Walla Walla. They're wrapping up comments, hoping to get that done by the end of the week. Indications thus far are the comments are not that material, and we should be right around the cost that the district submitted. And if that happens, we are looking at a BCR, final BCR, when they complete the econ analysis, of somewhere between 2.1 and 2.5. It's a pretty big range, given the low number, but I'm always optimistic. I'm one of the optimists of the group that we might be closer to 2.5 than 2.0. We'll see how it goes. And as soon as I get that information, I won't wait till the next board meeting. I'll make sure to share that with the board as soon as we get it. Once the cost comes in from Walla Walla, the district needs about 1 week to process the econ analysis, crank out the new BCR, and do internal quality control. And then they'll be in a position to start sharing that information vertically to division and district. So we're in close contact with the Corps on that. As that work is completed, we'll be meeting with the Corps, teleconference or meeting, so that we can align our messaging and make sure that we share that with board staff, board members, city council members, so any lobbying trips or any messaging that takes place after that, we can all be on the same page. So speaking of which, we met with, staff met with Department of Water Resources last week to discuss advancement of the federal project. So in order for us to go into, to receive a New Start construction designation, we need to already have pre-engineering, pre-construction and engineering design authorization from the Corps. So that's what we're working towards in the fiscal year 18 Corps work plan. And that's this cost update and BCR update, and that's all geared towards getting that award sometime after the first of the year. We have a meeting scheduled in January with the Corps to start talking about the next increment and making sure that we're in alignment on what work we want to continue to lead so that we can position the Corps to pick up the ball when they get that design funding and carry it to the finish line. So we want to try and scope out where we do it, what we do, how far we carry that ball, so that, and what engagement they're going to be able to participate in along that process. Without funding, it's going to be limited, but we want to make sure that we don't get too far out in front of them so that we're in alignment in handing that project over when they do get funding. So to support that effort, we met with the DWR last week to talk about amendments to our current funding agreement that would allow the state to cost share with us in advancing the next increment of the federal project. It's likely going to be the two sites that are along the Yolo bypass. One's just north of Interstate 80. The other one's adjacent in the Notch area, adjacent to like the CHP Academy, that area. So that's likely going to be the next increment. It was ranked as the highest risk by the Corps through the GRR, so that's what they've been thinking. It's also, we think, right-sized, i.e. small enough, so that we can get through design relatively quickly, and we can ask, or the Corps can ask, for a modest first construction request of $10 to $15 million range, as opposed to $200 million on a larger one. So we think that effort, both by timing and magnitude, is a good candidate to receive that New Start construction designation. So the outcome of that meeting with DWR was very favorable. They're on board with amending the agreement, or it may be as simple as amending the work plan. That's part of the agreement, so it may not require any board action or any action with DWR or the Central Valley Flood Protection Board. We're hoping it goes that way. They're checking with their legal folks to see if it can be as simple as, if you will, an amendment to the work plan. So our next steps with them are to provide something in writing to them in the form of a request, and then get a acknowledgement from DWR that yes, they support the amendment. And then once we have that, then we're going to be looking to go out for an RFP to go do design and or environmental, probably two RFPs, separate contracts, one to do design and one to do environmental for those areas. One of the other elements that we're looking at in terms of advancing is work along the Sacramento River North levee, which will likely be the next increment after the Yolo bypass. We are likely not going to suggest doing these in parallel, at least at this point. We don't want to get too far out in front of these costs where we're going to be relying on credit. Credit is still an issue for the Corps in terms of how they work that out, how they're able to approve the credit requests, how they're able to fund the credit in addition to their normal funding requests. And so, although I think it's imperative that we keep advancing the design on the first increment, the Yolo bypass sites, it's not so imperative that we advance design on the Sac River North, with the caveat that if we're unable, for whatever reason, to get New Start construction designation, because our BCR just doesn't compete well enough nationally, we may need to do some work to lower costs. And that would likely result in doing some work, geotechnical, the LURS, the land and easement and stuff that we'd be responsible for in order to shrink the costs of Sac River North in order to, in the next 2 years, do another cost update and go through the process that we're going through now. We hope we don't have to do that, but we'll know more in the coming months. So our meeting with the Corps to go through all of these things is set for January 23rd. So it'll be our team, representatives from DWR and representatives from the Corps, and we'll kind of outline all of those steps and how we work together to advance all of these efforts. And then on the lobbying side, we have the U.S. Conference of Mayors that's coming up end of January. I know that the mayor plans to attend. We've been working on the federal leave behind document in preparation for that trip, working with Holland and Knight as well, in conversation with Congresswoman Matsui's staff, who has also been reaching out to the Corps Division and has met with the ASA, the acting ASA back in D.C., and in addition to talk about the flood projects in the region, is making sure that everybody's aware of the Congresswoman's priorities when it comes to the West Sacramento project. And so we are one of her highest priorities at this point to get the PED funding. So she continues to be a great advocate for us and continues to meet and say positive things and make sure her priorities are known. Now, we hope to have, by the time the mayor is back in D.C., we hope to have the econ update completed and, the draft numbers that we can all share, Corps included. So we're going to keep working towards that between now and then. And then also, the cap-to-cap registration period is now open. I think it's April 14 through 18. So I plan to attend this year. And I'd be certainly interested in the board members who wish to attend, so we can coordinate. And I think I just saw an email today from the flood team. There's a kickoff meeting. I think it's Friday, January 12th. And of course, I'll be on vacation that week, so I'll have to check in with folks when I return. But
I'll show up for you.
all right. I think that, let me touch on a couple of the things that Mark pointed out with the finances, but before I do that, are there any questions about sort of all of that stuff and work that I've outlined and
You guys have any?
where we're planning on going in the coming year?
I had a couple of questions. What is the Sacramento River North project that you're going to start to investigate? What's the extended range of that? Is that all the north section or certain portions, or?
Yeah, so if the Corps will likely not bite off the entire Sac River North as a project. They will likely break it up into segments and do one segment at a time as a discrete project. But when it comes to, if we need to advance things to lower cost, we're going to look at the entire reach, from the Sac bypass all the way down to the
Tower Bridge or?
to the barge canal.
Yeah, okay.
Because we need to look at the extent of the entire reach and the entire cost in order to have an effective cost reduction. So, and we want to make sure that we don't do work that ends up, for whatever reason, becoming stale if the Corps doesn't get to that segment of the reach for 5 years. So that's the kind of coordination we want to make sure that we do with the Corps. So whatever we end up investing is not a wasted investment, both from the cost reduction as well as usable information that the Corps can take and use for design purposes.
Okay. And then you talked about the Corps finishing up their economic process and whatnot, and getting the results from Walla Walla up there. I didn't quite understand how much more review beyond that will be needed before you actually have a certified or whatever term, document to move forward with.
So the real driver for all of the update is the certified cost. That we expect to have shortly.
Shortly, yeah.
In the next week or two, the next week or two of work.
But is it reviewed by
Now
up the
that's-
ladder, or that's it?
Once it's certified by Walla Walla, that's it.
Good.
And so once the Corps has that certified cost, then it's pretty much feeding that into formulas. And so the rest of the economic update, including the calculation of the BCR, is pretty formulaic. So when they get a draft at that point, it still goes out for an agency technical review, just like the cost does. There's very little chance that that's going to change because it's so formulaic. There's not a lot of variables
Okay.
like there is with the cost. So the Corps feels pretty confident in being able to, once they've done their internal quality control, of messaging what that new BCR is. And so we're going to follow their lead, if you will, and
Yeah.
message the same.
Okay. Well, very good. And then we'll have something available as usual. You know, Congress is continuing to push forward any final budget for 2018, and that's favorable for us at this
Yes.
point.
It gives
To be
us some
able to-
time, yeah.
Yeah, to be able to have something together, so when the mayor and others go back there, and then ultimately when the Corps does their work plan, we have all the things in place for them to make a favorable decision, hopefully.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay.
So if you want to look back at the high-level cash flow model that Mark went over, I just want to go down to the uses window down the third one down the sheet. And you'll see the local capital improvement projects. And then you'll see West Sacramento's share of the federal project locally led. And then, so there's sort of two segments of that. And one really refers to the Yola Bypass piece, as well as Sac River North. That's the second one there. And then the third one down is really the larger federal project. And as Mark, in its entirety. And as Mark pointed out, this view, which takes us through 25, 26, is largely driven by SB 5 requirements to have the 200-year level of flood protection in place by 2025. So we're assuming a very high level of participation by the Corps, both in terms of how much they construct and how much funding they get. It also assumes that we receive all of our credit. So it's in a very aggressive schedule. And I think what you'll see over the coming quarters as we go over this table is likely to get a little longer. The funding per year is likely to go down a little bit. It may push some of the red that we see, its magnitude may come down a little bit, as well as when it occurs, could push out a little bit. And certainly, we're not going to advance in 1819 or 1718, 1819, 1920. We're not going to advance so much of the federal project that we undermine our ability to fund, to complete Southport and all of that. So we are going to make sure that we have the capacity to fund the next increment, and we'll do that in such a way that we remain solvent and positive cash flow. So all of the things that we're keeping in mind as we move this program forward. So with that, I think that completes my updates, and if you have any other questions, be happy to
Well,
answer.
just on that, Greg, and you mentioned, this near-term stuff, and you have listed 2.1 and 5.1, expenses, towards those possible projects. That's Safeca's share in that. Is that the actual work being done, if the Corps took up the project, huh?
So that's a good question. So the first line that has the footnote 5.
Yes.
For the West Sacramento Sheriff Federal Project, that's the entire design cost, and I'll explain this in a second, for both Yola Bypass and Sac River North. So this was our first rip at it, and I will say that it's been in the last week or so that we've met and discussed and went, I don't think doing this in parallel with these types of expenditures is in our best interest at this point in time. So one of the first changes you will likely see is this stretching out a little bit, and we plan to do Yola Bypass and Sac River North in serial. So we'll take on the first increment, Yola Bypass pieces, and then likely shift gears, if necessary, into Sac River North. So the expenditures will come down a little bit and not be the combined cost of both. And the way we're modeling this, because this is being done in conjunction with the state, as you know, we carry the cost and then get reimbursed. So there is a commensurate revenue, which is state reimbursement, in the sources table. So this line item here in the uses captures the entire cost of design.
Okay.
Our share,
And you have the estimated share.
and the estimated share by the state is recuperated in
Okay.
the sources
Okay.
table. If that's something that you want to see separate, we can break it out as a separate line item in the sources.
I don't think so. I mean, all the state revenue is coming in different percentages and
Yeah.
whatnot. This
Now-
is looking at a cash flow, so it doesn't really matter.
Now, we have a spreadsheet that's like 10 times the size of this, which we call the planning level cash flow model, which we look at every week or two, in which we meet internally once a month to review and make sure that we're tracking everything. We have many, many line items broken out, much more than
Gotcha.
this. And it's even crowding an 11 by 17 worksheet. So we are managing it and looking at the various different elements, but we condense it here for the high level. So you guys have a view of the big picture.
From an SB 5 policy deal, I mean, whether that 2025 deadline's going to be explored, is there anything going on at the state level that would indicate that may come at some point, or is there any efforts amongst the flood community as a whole to discuss that issue?
So there's certainly a lot of discussion amongst the flood community as a whole. There has not been any formal action that I'm aware of that any agency is taking with lobbyists or with representatives to look at that timeframe. But so I don't know that I can say much more than that. But we certainly want to participate in any lobbying or any change to legislation. The general discussion centers around those that have an authorized federal project will likely not be held to the same standard as those who have been sitting by idly, waiting for things.
Because there's a path for...
Because there's a path forward, exactly.
Okay, very good. That's it?
All right.
Okay. We got a new agenda item here, director's comments, and this came from my desire to make a comment on a subject, and I asked council how to best to present that. So that is an item that we'll have on an ongoing basis if directors have comments they want to make. And so first I'll ask if there's anything that you guys need to bring up. In which case that I would like to make a clarification on something that happened a couple of weeks ago before the LAFCO Yolo County Local Area Formation Committee on their review, and they're updating an MSR on local maintaining agency governance, which is the reclamation districts in Yolo County. And obviously, part of that, they look at the West Sacramento area. And as part of requesting comments, they received a letter from the city expressing a desire to take a look at some consolidation of the RDs into the city governance system. And the RDs, for a variety of reasons, we were opposed to that thinking, and most importantly, because we think a focused, efficient levee maintenance operation is best for that type of operation. But they had a meeting on 2 weeks ago today, on 12/7, to discuss the draft. And at that meeting, Mayor Cabalden spoke on behalf of the city and the city council, he said, explaining his thoughts and the benefits of consolidating all the operations under city control. And as he was making his comments, he mentioned that there had been some disagreements amongst the JPA, and although this isn't looking exactly at the JPA, it does possibly affect how this JPA will operate in the future. And he mentioned that there was comments coming from the RD members on whether or not it was a good thing for other people in the region to get funding for the levee projects, and we don't. And whether we should go out and fight with the others to win some of that money. He said the city takes a more regional approach and view, and that's because they have broader relations with others. And then when he was pressed further to explain the disagreements, he says that some members of the JPA have advocated going to war and battle against others in the region, and that regional coordination really should be the way to go. And I know this interpretation, or whether where it came from, was from an internal communication that I sent last May, and it had to do with the issue of the PED funding that happened in the work plan in 2017. And I expressed some reservations of the efficiency, or not the efficiency, but of the efforts of our lobbying efforts in D.C. And in that communication, I did mention that one of our regional partners, Safeco, did receive, substantial funding, and that we should have been able to as well. And if that was interpreted as saying I wanted to go against some regional folks for monies versus ourselves, that was not my intention, and I think that is against the regional effort that we need to continue to maintain. It couldn't be, farther from what I was attending, and I agree with the mayor that coordinated regional cooperation is very important in attracting federal funding, just as Greg just mentioned here, now is what's going forward. So I wanted just to make that point, that has never been an intention of any of the reclamation districts, or I believe anybody on this board, that we compete for funds, but we need to do it in a coordinated regional way, and I'll stay with that. The good news is I think we have seen improvements. Greg just mentioned it just today in his report on how we seem to have a focus on getting this PED money in 2018 budget, which is really important when you look at this sheet right here. So let's all keep up the good work. The city has a major role in this, in their management of Wascafa Forest, but ultimately this board's the responsible party, and so let's all work together. So that's it. With that, anything else? Then we're adjourned.